Good morning, good afternoon, and good day wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of Sales TV Live. Today, we're talking about the benefits of an unrealistic leader in sales. I'm joined by Sam Palazzolo. Sam is managing director at Tip of the Spears Ventures, and he's also the author of Leading at the Tip of the Spear. Sam brings a wealth of experience from his background in sales, marketing, coaching, and leadership development. His insights on using unrealistic leadership to drive success are highlighted in his upcoming book, The Unrealistic Leader. Sam, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
It's great to have you here, Sam. So, Sam, start off by telling us a little bit about you, your journey into sales, and where you are today.
Yeah, so I'll give you the 30,000 foot overview. I led a tech startup to a private equity exit about 12 years ago, and then I jumped into I had such a great experience with the private equity firm. I come from the world of big consulting. At Deloitte, I was a strategy expert. At Aon Hewitt, I was a pricing and compensation expert, and I've had my own consultancy for a little over a decade where we focus on business acceleration or business scaling. But when I left the tech startup, I had such a great experience with the private equity firm. I said, I want to build something a little different. I want to build a firm that is 50-50, 50% venture firm, 50% consultancy. And here we are 12 years later, we're still true to those roots, or how it is that we drafted it on the back of a cocktail napkin. I should also share this much, that I've taught at the university level for the last 15 years. I'm an adjunct faculty member at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, UNLV. And I've written several books. This one that you mentioned called The Unrealistic Leader, How to Get Real Results by Being Unrealistic. This one will be my 8th. So, but that's a brief overview. All of our leadership development programs, I thought it'd be a nice off-ramp if I started a 501c3 back in 2016. We call it the Javelin Institute because we have a thing for spears and javelins and all that kind of blood and guts and track and field events. So, but we do all of our leadership development as well as executive coaching at the Javelin Institute. It rolls up underneath an executive education offering, if you will, 501c3.
Excellent. So, Sam, let's jump right into it.
Yeah.
What do you mean by an unrealistic leader?
Yeah, so here's what I found in the research that I conducted with working with well over 1,000 leaders, coast to coast and geographically with no boundaries, even from a coastal spreading over to Europe, Africa, Australia, as well as here in North, as well as South America. I found that there's a vast body of empirical evidence that exists that says the more unrealistic you are, the more real your results will be. So let me say that again. The more unrealistic you are, the more real your results will be. And so therein began a research, which is what I'm really good at. I'm an accountant by training, to attempt to identify, okay, great. What are some of these unrealistic techniques, maybe tips, maybe tricks that you can implement as a leader into your game so that way you can achieve some of those real results by being unrealistic?
I've had plenty of leaders that are unrealistic.
I
you can tell where I'm going with that.
I guess the most famous unrealistic leader who used his lack of realism around positioning things to great success was Steve Jobs. You know, where people would slave for months and years on a project and they'd turn up with it and he'd go, well, that's crap, isn't it? And they'd cry, but then they'd come back with something even better really shortly afterwards in order to try to please him. So is that kind of what you mean when you're talking about unrealistic leaders?
You know, it can be. And inevitably during a conversation, whether I'm presenting to a group of entrepreneurs, the other week we spoke to a Fortune 500 company on this topic, a group of their high potential up and coming leaders. typically Steve Jobs' name does come up. And I think Steve embodies kind of one of our tenets in the Unrealistic Leader, which is the ethical component. In other words, being unrealistic can be utilized, if you want to use the Star Wars analogy, for good, the good side of the Force, or the not so good side of the Force, if you know what I mean. You can utilize it to be Luke Skywalker for the good, or perhaps Darth Vader for the bad. Your choice. You pick your favorite Steve Jobs moment. I know I have mine. And being from a tech perspective and working up in the Bay Area, I think maybe I got to see a little bit of Steve Jobs that maybe others didn't throughout their career path, or what might be the rose-colored sunglasses that people perceive to how he might have behaved. But I think that there was probably some good there, probably not the majority from my perspective.
Mm.
Help me differentiate between unrealistic and unreasonable.
No, great question. When it comes to unreasonable, I think that and unrealistic, I think that there's a tipping point. The tipping point typically comes down to, if you think back to when you and I first started working together, Rob, which is hard to believe, but what's it been? 16 years, 17 years now? Crazy.
About that, yeah.
But we always seem to have this dilemma back then. The dilemma still exists today, and that is, are you a leader if when you look behind you, you're not leading anyone? I think to a certain degree, you've got to lead yourself, so it begins with that. So I don't want to take leading yourself away from the equation. But the tipping point generally between unrealistic and unreasonable occurs when you look behind you and you recognize nobody's following me. Right? I'm not leading anybody, or they've all diverted their attention, their path, and whatnot. So very important, again, to stay on the unrealistic side. When you do tip over, we've developed several techniques that you can leverage to get back from that unreasonable perspective.
And what does unrealistic leadership look like in a sales environment?
Yeah. So the question that I got the other day is this the obnoxious flamethrower sales leader of folklore, right? Is this the person that is going to do the Sherman March to the Sea and burn everything in their path? And the answer is no. By unrealistic in a sales capacity, it does mean setting beyond stretch goals. But then comes the science of, okay, we've architected this plan that is very unrealistic, but how do we back into it and break it down? Not that it's going to be a realistic scale too, but how can we make it more realistic in our approach to becoming more unrealistic? So in a selling capacity, again, very important to set beyond stretch goals, but then comes the planning element. Not only from a contingency of what could potentially go wrong, but what needs to go right. Very often, I don't know if you see it, but the sales leaders I work with, they miss one key component time and time again, and that is the accountability feature. How is it that they're going to hold others' feet to the fire, but perhaps most importantly, their own feet to the fire when they don't achieve the results that they anticipated or desired? This accountability piece is crucial when it comes to being an unrealistic leader. So I don't know, again, if you see that with the leaders you work with, maybe it's just my unrealistic folks where they shuck and jive and dodge the accountability moment, but that's what we see time and time again.
Yeah, it's definitely a case of putting the blame on those people that they're leading, isn't it? So come on, Sam, why didn't you make your number? Well, actually, it's because I've not given you any help or guidance in order to achieve that number. But what does unrealistic actually look like in the workplace? Because I think you made a really interesting comment a moment ago about the difference between unrealistic and unreasonable. Now, we all kind of have been party to or subject to unreasonable behavior from people that that we report to. But unrealistic, how do you balance the two, and what is unrealistic but still something that that doesn't disengage me as one of your
Before you
reports?
answer that, Sam, can I maybe give some context?
Yeah, please.
So I reported to a sales leader once where we had our annual goals and they were divided monthly. And in January, the team as a whole, and this team was 1,000 sales representatives, were about 10% short of their January goal, which puts us 10% behind for the year. She said, add that to February's goal. In February, they missed by 30% because they missed the February goal plus that add-on. I think you can tell where this is going. She said, add that to March. Now, prior to today's conversation, I'm thinking that's unrealistic. Help me now reframe that. How would you consider that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Let me go back to the other statement, because I think it's imperative to recognize that when you have leaders who perhaps aren't putting their best foot forward, where they're placing blame elsewhere, I think you can look at a couple of crucial things if you sat in that chief revenue officer seat, like I think we all have. And by this point in my career, I've sat in every C-suite chair, even the chief human resource officer one, which is kind of ironic as an accountant. But as the CEO told me, our people, we consider them to be numbers. So you'll be right at home as an accountant. But the key thing from a chief revenue officer, especially when laying blame elsewhere, I mentioned the accountability piece, but think about, we all want the magic pill. We all want something that if we digest it is going to make us a better leader and make those around us better individuals, so that we achieve our numbers on a month in, month out basis. Here's the reality though. A magic pill is an advanced play. And if you can't do the basics, you're never going to get a shot at achieving the advanced play, or it'll be a very rare blind squirrel finding that moment. Here's an example. And Adam, you brought it up, so I don't want to belabor the point, but this is important from an unrealistic leader perspective. If you think about one of the basic tenets of leadership is meeting with your folks, meeting with your people on a one-on-one basis, not only praising them in public in a group setting, but meeting with them so that way you can not only continue with the praise, but let's face it, at some point, we probably are going to have a conversation that goes something like, how did we miss our number? What do you think went wrong? Those moments break down to, as one of the leaders I worked with told me initially when I got my first team leader role, was, look, your people are either going to be unable or unwilling. If they're unable, that's on you and me. They either don't have the right skills, they don't have the right tools to do their job effectively. Either way, that unable is on you and me. If they're unwilling, that's on them. We need to be able to identify that and see if we can't take corrective action quickly. Sometimes corrective action comes in the form of training. Sometimes it just comes in the form of dismissing, right? But I think back to my original point, which is the one-on-one coaching moment with a team member that's not performing at their best. Think about those one-on-one moments that you've either conducted or maybe the ones that you didn't conduct when you know you should have. We've all been there. And without shame, I don't live in a glass house, right? Because I'm casting stones out there. I'll be the first one to share with you that I can think of several times when I should have had that one-on-one meeting. But the reason I didn't was because, guess what? Business got in the way. Life got in the way. The demands on me from a bandwidth perspective were just further than what my capabilities would allow me to do in a given time period. So shame on me, but shame on those leaders who never do a one-on-one. I always tried to make it up the next week, right? If we had half-hour sessions, I try to bump it out to an hour, see if I couldn't make up some time lost. Maybe it was conference season and we had to go away, so we missed time together, and I couldn't leave the conference floor to hold a virtual or a phone call quickly with a sales team member. But I think it's one of those things where, again, the magic pill, that is an advanced play. The basics of leadership and the basics of getting the most out of your people, that's what needs to be conducted day in and day out. Those are those types of planning moments that an unrealistic leader builds into their calendar, so that way they achieve those unrealistic results. So I think I might have hit both of your questions.
Yeah, you certainly did. But I think that, you know, you're clearly, as a leader, part of your job is to encourage and lift up people and all of this stuff. But, you know, as you said, you know, life and business gets in the way sometimes. So sometimes you simply haven't got the bandwidth, and the time that you're available, I'm not available. So, you know, there are a whole host of reasons. But I think that there's another thing in there, isn't there, which is if you're a leader who leads by example, it's quite an easy conversation to have. Look, come on, Sam, you know you need to do this. I'm doing it. You can do it. If, however, I'm not a leader that leads by example, if I'm a leader who, well, you said the thing is you look over your shoulder and there's no one behind you, you know, if I'm not walking the walk, if I'm instructing you what you need to do and I'm not an exemplar of that behavior, clearly I don't want to be having a one-to-one session with you. When I say to you, come on, Sam, you need to be doing A, B, and C, and you say, well, you're not doing A or B or C. So, and I've had some, I had one instance where I was working within an organization, and I worked direct for the chief executive, and the company was getting bigger, and they brought in a managing director. Now, the chief executive was a magnificent manager. So when we were with a client and something was going well, and the client would say, oh, Brian, you've done a fantastic job with this, he'd say, well, it's nothing to do with me, it's Adam. He's the one that's done the great job. If something was going wrong and the client said, Adam, why hasn't this been as we expected it to be? He'd say, oh, no, that's not Adam's fault. That's my fault. I didn't brief properly.
Right.
Then this managing director who came in, who was completely the antithesis of this. So the client would say, Adam, why haven't you delivered this on time? And I'd go, yeah, Sam, why haven't you delivered this on time? Or the other way around, you know, you've done a fantastic job with this, Adam. And I'd say, yes, I'm very proud of how I've been able to do it. And none of the praise was passed through. And so it was quite interesting being the recipient of both kinds of manager within the organization.
Yeah.
But I guess that it's a lot easier to have those conversations, isn't it? If you're an exemplar. And it's a lot more comfortable for you to have those conversations if you can hold the moral high ground.
I think it's easier and it's comfortable if you can hear over the bus that just backed up over you. All I could think of was beep, beep, beep. I can hear it. I could see it. Yeah. I worked for a gentleman named Tom for a brief period of time. Tom was high on volunteering and idealism, short on reality to actually get stuff done. We would go into meetings and Tom would continuously volunteer my team to participate in different initiatives that were way outside of our scope and lane, right? It wasn't that he was unrealistic in his expectations. He was unreasonable from the perspective of he wanted to promote himself, and he knew the fast track ticket was to volunteer for everything and almost let's just do more with less. We can make that happen. But that beeping sound, yeah, I had a flashback moment there, Adam. You do bring up a good point, though, and we saw it time and time again with unreasonable or unrealistic leaders, not unreasonable, unrealistic leaders, where they fully embrace that everyone is watching them all the time. It's kind of like Las Vegas. There's cameras everywhere. You can't outrun or outpace the cameras. With that in mind, unrealistic leaders recognize that they need to lead by example. It doesn't mean that they always need to get it right. This is a common misperception. The people that you work with in a stakeholder perspective, think of yourself as a sales leader, either your peer sales leaders, the chief revenue officer, or your superiors in the organization you report up to, or those subordinates that report into you. They're not looking for you to behave in a game of perfection. As a matter of fact, what we found is that it's not quite a screw up, move up moment where if you make mistakes, you'll get elevated. But if you make mistakes and you properly course correct after the mistakes, that's when people really resonate with you as an unrealistic leader. That's when they'll lay themselves on the tracks, as we had one of our participants tell us. He said, I wouldn't have believed it, but I actually had people go to bat for me. When we didn't achieve one of the goals that we had established early on in the year, I was amazed at the people that worked with me, not only those people that reported into. You would anticipate that those would be the first people to lay on the tracks. But the peers, the people that generally were on the same rung of the corporate ladder, and in a dog-eat-dog corporate ladder scenario where org charts are getting flatter and flatter, you would think that those would be the people who would sense the weakness, the blood's in the water, it's time to attack. But they actually rallied behind our leaders when they made unrealistic mistakes. The superiors, they also loved it too. Guess why? Because they saw themselves in the leader who was trying to do things, trying to be unconventional and failing. Because especially in that failure moment when there is a contingency plan to turn things around, they saw themselves, because leaders get to that high rung not from achieving success 100% of the time. Experience comes from failure. And the Unrealistic Leader, you would think that it'd be a success-oriented book, but there's a portion of it that's failure-oriented, where in order to achieve, you're going to have to stick your neck out. And when you do, not everything's going to work out properly or the way that you had planned. You know, there's so many variables that are out there. If you think about it from a sales leader's role, and any leader for that matter, you know, there's so many different things that can happen. And guess what? Murphy's Law says that they inevitably will happen and go wrong. You know, we had somebody the other week who was talking a little bit about, you remember back to the pandemic? And it's like, yeah, we all remember back to the pandemic. But that's a great instance where I don't care what it is that you were doing. When that date came in March, everything flipped. The whole world and paradigm that we were operating in. We've learned something called the Black Swan event and what that looked like and meant. You know, it was a change around time. And the successful unrealistic leaders embraced the moment and recognized, you know what? It's time for me to not just stay in my lane, but let's find the other lanes where it is that I can have impact and help others.
So how do you measure the success of an unrealistic goal? Is it only about the end result, or how do you put value on the pursuit itself?
Yeah, you know, the inner accountant in me loves dashboards. And I'm a firm advocate that if you measure something, you can manage it. And so what are the metrics and what are the KPIs surrounding success? Typically, they're thought of as goals, and goals, if broken down appropriately, can get down to the monthly and maybe even weekly level. I think that that's an important step to keep in mind. I think there's also the moment, and what we found is that in being unrealistic, the non-quantitative, so in other words, some subjective criteria, if you can eliminate any subjectivity or actual hard numbers being applied, you're probably going to be in a better place when it comes to actually hitting goals. You know, we see leaders all the time, you know, who come and ask, and I'm thinking of one of them who said, Sam, I'm a new leader in the organization. I have about 200 folks that report into me. And I said, great, how is it going? And he said, I want to fire them all. And I said, how long have you been there? And he said, I've only been here 2 weeks, but I'm telling you, I should fire them all and I should start over. My recommendation and my advice was that, rule number one of getting yourself out of a hole, stop digging. Rule number two, I don't know if firing them all is going to get you where it is that you want to go as quickly as you want to get there. The challenge of being an unrealistic leader is that you've got to work with people who aren't like yourself. Any leader can go out there, any individual can go out there and work with people that are like themselves. If, as Robert Cialdini, the author of Influence and Persuasion, the world's foremost social psychologist at Arizona State University, taught me, like attracts like. Like attracts like. And that's really great. But as a leader, you're not always only going to be able to work with people that are like yourself. So you got to have the talent and the skill set to be able to work with others. And that's what makes a truly special, unrealistic leader. But Rob, back to your question. Go figure. The accountant in me loves dashboards that are filled in with metrics and KPIs. And one of the things that we developed, this might sound odd, but a self-ranking assessment of how unreal you are on a day in, day out basis that allows you to architect your unreal leader path. That is good enough. A simple scale from 0 to 10. 0, not evident. 10, I'm best in class. Sam, come write an article on me. We're going to get it published in the Harvard Business Review. We'll both become famous, and you'll be able to achieve retirement in a much shorter time period than your wife and you expected. I'm looking forward to that.
There we go.
But it is one of those things where even a little self-assessment, sometimes we think the hard figures, the hard numbers, the black and the white of accounting don't lie. The red, we wish they would, but the black and the white don't. But even a self-assessment where they give themselves their own ranking can be helpful. I'll put this out there, though, to you. Guess what's even more important in that type of a self-assessment? We have the individual who is ranking themselves. We have someone like us, who's the sales leader, who's looking at that self-assessment. Guess who would be an ideal other party to have?
People reporting to them?
Yeah, it could be the people reporting to them. It could be one of the other sales leaders. The moral of the story, they need an accountability buddy, right?
There you go.
Someone who's going to, let's face it, as a sales leader, we may see some of the behavior, but we probably don't see all of it. And so think of the accountability buddy as kind of the relief valve, the person that's going to say, now, come on, Rob, you marked yourself down here a 7. We both know you're not achieving and performing at a 7 level. I mean, it's your own bias that's giving yourself an elevated score.
Rob, you're a 1.
Right.
That's what Sam's saying, really.
Yeah. I wasn't going to say it. Adam did.
That's fine. That's fine. I can always count on Adam to keep me accountable.
Yeah. Which one of us knows him for 16 years?
Yeah, that's right. Sam, this has been fantastic. Thank you. How can people learn more? Where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so javelininstitute.org is where we run all of our Unrealistic Leader programs through. You can find information there. I'm also an active LinkedIn user. You can meet me there at any time. There's a couple of weeks of the month that I open up my profile for invites all the time. Typically, 3 out of the 4 weeks, I require my email address, which kind of cuts down on some of the spammers and or biz dev people who want to outreach and connect with me. There is a question here. Brian asked, can you give some examples of non-quantitative metrics? Do you have time for just one of them?
Sure, let's go for it.
Okay. So one of them, we built an Unrealistic Leader. And if you connect with me, request the Unrealistic Leader model, I'll send these over to you. But the first portion of the Unrealistic Leader is, go figure, it begins with the U. It's unconventional. The ability to embrace innovation and novel approaches to challenges. Again, unconventional. The ability to embrace innovation and novel approaches to challenges. 0 to 10, where are you right here, right now? And more importantly, what would your sales leader say, or your accountability buddy? So that's one example of a non-quantitative metric, Brian. Thanks for the question. If you want to see more, connect with me. I'll send the whole list over to you.
Excellent. We now have a newsletter. Don't miss an episode. Get show highlights, beyond the show insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes, including a recap of this one. Scan the QR code on screen or visit us at salestv.live/newsletter. This has been another edition of Sales TV Live. On behalf of myself and Adam, Sam, and to everyone in the audience, thank you for being a part of today's show, and we look forward to seeing everyone next time. Goodbye.
Thank you.